I've had a portrait sitting at the lab for 3 months, waiting to be framed. So for the last 3 months, I've been waiting, and my client's been patiently waiting for their family portrait to be framed. And because of the supply chain and the extreme cost of materials, it's just been sitting there, waiting and sitting and waiting. Well, I'm tired of waiting, my client's tired of waiting, and I want to get paid. So I'm going to build this damn frame myself. Now, if you're a photographer, you're likely not going to be building your own frames, but hopefully when you watch this video, you'll get a little bit of a better feel, an idea for what it takes to build the frames and frame the portraits that you're creating for your customers. And if you're a woodworker, hopefully you'll learn something that you can take away and use in your shop, or maybe not. Maybe you'll learn something that you shouldn't use in your shop. Either way, something will be learned today. Also, if you want to know what this floating frame cost me, stick around to the end of the video and I will show you. Now, let's head out to my shop, aka my garage, and start building a frame. All right, well, welcome to my messy shop, aka garage, where I'm working on a white oak cabinet and 2 shelving units for a church right now. Now, I've never built a floating frame before, and of course, the first one that I ever build will be a 53 by 30, so this thing could go south pretty darn fast. Okay, so I'm going to be using this corner sample that is used for my framing by the lab as a template, as a guide, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm also going to be using cherry wood for my frame that's going to be dyed black because that's what the client wanted. I'm also going to be using pine as my supporting frame. So pine is going to be used in this area of the frame, and cherry will be used in the main area of the frame. The first step, however, is going to be to plane down this 3/4 inch pine to about a 1/2 inch so I can get as close as I can to the guide that I'm using. All right, so now that we have all our supports planed down, and what I did, instead of planing them down to 1/2 inch, I actually planed them down to match perfectly this profile here. So then when I go to cut the sides of the frame, it'll be way easier because all I have to do is duplicate the width of this side to cut the sides on the cherries. So at this point, I think we're ready to go in and start cutting the widths on our cherry for the actual frame. right, so now that we have the widths of our frame cut, it's time for the most important cuts of this entire process. And that is the 45-degree miter cuts that are going to join the short parts of the frame to the long parts of the frame. Fortunately, I have this crosscut sled that I set up to cut 45-degree miter cuts on the edge. I built this yesterday, so let's see how it works. Next, I need to cut the rabbets into the edge pieces to house the actual supporting pieces. Now with all the cuts made, it's time to start gluing it up and putting it together to see how it fits. All right, so with the frame all glued up and ready for staining, let's go ahead and build the supporting part of this frame, which will also help square it all up. All right, so now that we have the frame ready and our frame support ready, it's time to turn this sucker black. Now for the frame, I've chosen to use India ink to dye the frame black, and I've tested the piece here and it looks pretty good. You know, it gets a nice dark tone. And I think with some finish on it, a satin finish on it, it's going to look really good. So what you're going to need for this part of the project is you're going to need rubber gloves because you don't want to stain your hands black, some kind of application cloth, and then of course, India ink. All right, so now that we have the frame completely dyed and my workbench partially dyed, I'm going to go ahead and spray paint the support system of the frame, and I'm going to use the Krylon Fusion all-in-one paint primer satin black to do that. And the reason I'm just spray painting it really quick is because this won't really be seen at all. So I just want to give it a quick spray paint, get everything to look uniform black, and then we can attach it to the frame. All right, so with everything dyed and painted, we are ready to put this thing together and get it ready for clear coat. All right, so now with the frame completely painted and dyed and it's squared up really nicely, we can move ahead to the clear coat, which for this, I'm going to be using the Minwax Rattle Can lacquer. And the reason I'm using this really is because I don't want to break out my big sprayer, and lacquer dries really fast, so I can coat this thing several times very quickly and get this job done and ready for the portrait. All right, so now with our floating frame finished and ready, it's time for the best part, and that's adding our creative portrait artwork. I'd say that turned out pretty dang good, considering that's the first floating frame that I've ever built. And I think the client's portrait actually looks really good in it, don't you think? Now for the cost. According to my expert materials breakdown, the cost of this project cost for the cherry $42.45, for the pine was $24.68, for the India ink and hangers, $7. Now that's figuring half of what it actually cost, because I only used half of the, actually less than half, but you get it. And the black paint and the lacquer cost $10. I didn't use full cans on that, so I actually calculated about half on that as well, for a grand total of cha-ching, $84.13, saving me a heck of a lot of money doing it myself. Now, in full transparency, this frame build did take me longer than the 12 or 13 minutes that you see here on YouTube. It actually took me probably about 2 to 3 days, not full days, just a little bit of time here and there. It did actually go very quickly, but it did take some time to let the paint dry, let the lacquer dry, and do all these kind of things. So about 3 days to build it. Alrighty, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe you learned a little something that you can use in your studio or your shop. And I'll see you next time on The Creative Portrait.